Hello everyone, this is the Red Riot Robot, coming to you with Logging October 2025. This month I was actually able to complete more than I thought I would, so let's get right into it. First things up, since it's the spooky month, I figured I would have at least one spooky game that I played, and that game was Silent Hill F. I've kind of mentioned this game a few times in the podcast and other areas. This game was a litmus test for whether or not I would consider buying Konami games down the line. Because it's one thing to go out and remake something that's already kind of established and just do it and make it appealing to modern gaming habits like controls and stuff. It's another thing to make a whole new, brand new thing in general. And that's what they've done here. And so you might ask, how did they do? I think they did a pretty good job for the most part. I'm not going to get into crazy details here. I will say this game does a fantastic job in writing, sound design, the music, as always with all of the Silent Hill games, is fantastic. The characters are great. The ambiance and aesthetic of this game is spot on. This game does a fantastic job with Silent Hill puzzles. These are probably some of the best puzzles we've had since, like, I'm going to say 3. 4 didn't have any kind of weird, amazing puzzles, but 3 had some good ones. And those are my positive feelings. The one thing, and this is my biggest knock against this and the thing keeping me from loving this game, is the combat. Now, the discourse around this has been, I feel, odd, because a lot of people will kind of say, and correctly say, this is the best combat Silent Hill has had ever. And in a lot of ways, they're right, but to me, the combat is still bad. But then the second argument comes around, which is, well, it's a horror game. If you don't want to deal with monsters, you don't have to fight them. You just run away, as you could do in like Silent Hill 1 through 4. While that is true for those games, this game sort of forces several combat rooms. You have to know how fighting works in this game. This game is extremely combat focused, and because of that, I think the combat in this game is bad. And it actually is a detriment to the game. If it was like 1 through 4, and you could sort of ignore the combat, except for maybe like a boss fight or the occasional like situation where you have to fight to get out of something with less scrapes, I would be fine with that. But that's not what they're doing here. They're forcing you to fight. And that's not bad, technically. But if the gameplay's not up to snuff, it doesn't feel good. And I know, like, oh, well, it's a horror game. Maybe it shouldn't feel good. I kind of feel that they don't want... To me, in my experience, most developers want their gameplay to feel good. It's not like a end boss from a Suda51 game where he wants you to feel disappointed. It's probably the biggest knock against this game. But you can also play it on easy, which is what I would recommend, or I think it's called story mode, which doesn't, in my opinion, make the combat good. It just makes it tolerable and easy enough to get through to where it doesn't make the game a drag. And those are my overall general thoughts. I do think that this is a really good game, and I do recommend it despite the combat issues. Maybe wait for a sale if you're too worried about the combat. But overall, if you've been looking for something that scratches that Silent Hill itch, I would definitely recommend this. It's pretty good. I think they've done a great job, and they've created at least a template to make better games down the line. Hopefully Konami doesn't screw the pooch. Alright, let's cover a couple of smaller games that I did play, but I don't have a whole lot to say about them. First up, Logic Bombs by Matthew Matosis. I was reminded this existed by another YouTuber, Razorblade Mango. Thanks. Matthew Matosis is probably one of my all-time favorite video game essayists, and part of the reason why I started this YouTube channel. And I definitely wanted to support him on his career at game making. It looks like Minesweeper, but instead of finding exactly where the mines are, you know where they're at, and you're kind of trying to develop a floor plan to safely set them off. At least I think that's what the idea of the game is, what it kind of makes me think it's trying to go for. It's very interesting, and it does take a lot of like just looking at a grid and figuring out the numbers. If you like games like Minesweeper or Picross, I highly recommend this. The other smaller game is Yooka-Re-Playlee. I was one of the backers for Yooka-Laylee back in the day. I also still never got my t-shirt. Thanks, guys. I was very disappointed with it back in the day. I didn't think it was terrible, but it definitely wasn't very good. This game kind of fixes a lot of the pacing issues with the game by kind of just turning it into a miniature Mario Odyssey. I do have a couple of problems where it lacks some tutorialization for a couple of puzzles, but otherwise this is a lot better version of the original Yooka-Laylee game, in my opinion. And that's it for my smaller games. On to one of the bigger games that I've actually been playing since September, which was Trails in the Sky First Chapter, which is a remake of Trails in the Sky, which came out in like 2004. This game has a very special place in my heart. It's probably the game that got me to start playing more turn-based video games overall. Because before, the only turn-based games that I had ever played were Pokemon, which I didn't like, and like the Paper Mario games. And those kind of have little mini games to do the action, so I never considered it turn-based, which is silly. Trails is the game that got me out of that, and it's a combination of things that it does that sort of got me out of that. This is a game that has a weird amount of systems in it that kind of all interlock with each other in really interesting ways. First up, let's just kind of talk about the combat. The combat is turn-based, but it's one of those turn-based games where you have a timeline of attacks, and you have different attacks that can actually delay enemies or quicken your own side to be able to get more attacks out. And you have to sort of learn when to use different attacks to keep enemies from doing attacks and prepping for their big attacks. And also with the timeline, you have these little bonuses that appear on the character portraits, and these bonuses can be applied to enemies or yourself. And some of these bonuses are a guaranteed crit, a guaranteed free spell, so you can use your strongest spell with 0 magic, a free heal, a free magic regen, a craft point regen, which is the points that you use for your special attacks that aren't magical. Unfortunately, it says CP in this game. That's an unfortunate abbreviation. With that sort of timeline thing where you are trying to sort of steal those bonuses, because the game also gives you ways to steal them from the enemies, it creates a interaction with that timeline that I've liked a lot more than other games provide. Along with that, you also have things that are outside of combat that affect the combat themselves. This game has a list of recipes. I think it's like 68. And whenever you do a recipe correctly, you get a permanent stat buff for the entire party. And this can be anything. It can be skill points, it can be attack buff, magic buff, defense buff, magic defense buff, crit bonuses, evasion bonuses, everything. And you would think, oh, well, you can just scum save and just get those items on the first try, and you can do that. But there is also a positive side to failing the cooking, because you have a chance to fail. And while you don't get any stat bonuses, you do sometimes get better items with better healing properties or more useful properties. Maybe a successful cook will give you an item that heals for 50% and strengthens you by 20% for the next 5 rounds. Or if you fail, you'll get an item that heals you for 75% and buffs you for 100% for the next 3 rounds. So there's a positive aspect to failing as well. It doesn't feel like when you fail those cookings that you're completely failing. Also, this game has an entire system called skills, which are these sort of abilities that your characters can do at random. They can randomly start giving themselves a random buff at the end of their turn. They can actively tank damage from an attack that's going to hit another character if they have a specific skill that does that. And there's just a lot. I really like this game. Oh, and another aspect this game has, it has probably one of the best versions of NPCs changing as the story goes on. NPCs have a very large amount of like written text that they can go through. Like after every little action that happens, you can go around and talk to every NPC and they'll all have a new thing to say. Most of the time it's kind of just a recap of what you just did, but there are some times where you can find these little miniature behind the scenes stories of things that are happening in the towns, and it kind of gives a more living, breathing feel of an RPG, because it feels like as you're doing stuff, people are noticing things change and things, they'll say different things. And honestly, I think if this game was any less good than what it was, it wouldn't have started the franchise it did, which is now like, I want to say 14 games deep. And it's a very impressive franchise, and I just have a very large fondness for this game in particular. So if you ever have the want of a pretty good JRPG from the early 2000s, and also you get to experience like some voices that are a bit more common today but got their start with this game, like Johnny Young Bosch and Matt Mercer, this is a great game to play overall, and I think it's deserves a bit more of a spotlight than it's ever gotten. For our final game, I was able to get Ninja Gaiden 4. I was really curious about this game because it was advertised as a cooperation with Team Ninja and Platinum Games, and I was kind of curious what this game would end up being like. And of all things, it's like a halfway point between Metal Gear Rising and Ninja Gaiden 2, kind of. While I don't think it's perfect, I think it's pretty good. It does have a couple of major issues, which I'll get into, but overall the game is good. The biggest thing to talk about is the new combat system. For the most part, it is basically Ninja Gaiden again, but there is one little extra thing that they've added in, and that's called blood form weapons. So every weapon you get a total of 5 by the end of the game. And each of them has a base form, which is what they will be, like double swords, a staff, or a rapier. If you go into blood form, those weapons will transform into bigger weapons, like the swords will be like an odachi, the rapier will turn into a lance, a drill lance, and the staff will be a rocket hammer. And this isn't to be like, you have to build up like a super meter to be able to use those weapons. That's not what they're doing. You have this meter, this blood form gauge, that is constantly filling no matter what, and gets filled even faster when you hit enemies and do specific things. And what the game wants you to do is use your regular combos, and then you use your blood form attacks to essentially break guards. So 95% of what you're doing is the base weapons, with the occasional using like the special moves with the blood form weapons. This really does work overall. I have like one problem with it, which is you never get a weapon that feels very heavy outside of the blood form weapons. Most weapons feel kind of light. Everything does feel impactful, but you never get like a big weapon like the Eclipse Scythe or that big giant sword from 2. I forgot the name of it. There's never any weapons like that you get to have permanently. I can understand some people having the idea this game doesn't have anything big and weighty, and that's a little disappointing. They have changed how combos work. Previous games, combos were just how many hits you landed, which to get better scores, you typically used some of the less damaging weapons that did more hits. They have changed that. Now every hit has like a different number associated with it, and I'm not going to be able to remember it, but like say a base hit with the staff is a 5. If you hit with the blood form attack, it might be like 15, and then that number will reduce the number of times you repeat it. And so you'll also get more combo when you do an obliteration attack, which is the finisher moves, which those are back. The ultimate technique, the big move that lets you do a crap ton of hits onto one or two enemies, which this game really makes it a prominent feature. This is the game that I would say it is the most important to understand to use that specific move. You do get the Azuna drop along with some other attacks that are mainstays of the franchise, which I'm partially convinced this game was originally its own thing before they were approached to make a Ninja Gaiden game, because I will now get into the bad part. The way Ryu is implemented in this game is kinda bad overall in two ways. First, story-wise, he kind of doesn't have a reason to be there. Like, the reason he's there is really not that good and feels like just an excuse to have him there. Two, playing as him, overall, it's mostly the same as playing as Yakumo, but instead of being able to switch between weapons, you're able to switch between the Ninpo, the magic attacks he's had in the previous games. And these are actively detrimental to the entire framework of this game, because they use the blood form gauge, or in Ryu's case, the gleam gauge, and if you're going to choose between using a very quick and effective guard breaker attack that you can easily pull out with Ryu, or a magic attack that takes like a 15-second windup, and yeah, you're immune during that windup, but it just breaks the pacing of the game, you're gonna pick that guard break. So yeah, the Ninpos kind of suck. I don't like using them. Also, this game, because of the Ryu stuff, you basically get to experience the Devil May Cry 4 problem again, which is you get to go back through all the old levels again, and you get nothing really new, and it's definitely not as fun the second time, and they're just kind of rushing you through, and it feels like slapdash together. A fifth of the game is like this. Oh, also another thing that makes me think this wasn't originally a Ninja Gaiden game. This game has demons. And you might think, oh, you mean fiends? And the answer is no, because I thought they had gotten that wrong too. I thought that they're like, oh, well, they've just retranslated fiends into demons. But no, demons are a separate thing from fiends. I don't know the difference. They seem to actually fight each other in certain levels. But yeah, there's now two magical monster entities in the universe of Ninja Gaiden. So that's a thing. Ninja Gaiden 4, I will say, though, is better than 3 and 3 Razor's Edge. That was such a mess and bad, and I'm honestly won't ever take anyone serious who will ever say that Ninja Gaiden 4 is worse than those games. It's good, and in fact, I would say this is probably one of the better things Platinum has put out in a while, but I would say they still need a bit of work. Going into it, there's a lot of, like, granularity where there's some issues I have with the game, but if I were to do that, we would be here for like 2 hours, and I feel that's probably better left for a individual review. Well, that's everything for October. I had a pretty good month. Had a fun Halloween. By this point, it should be November when this video comes out. And as always, thank you for watching. This is the Red Riot Robot, signing out.